Today we're going to talk about all the we've messed up.
And so I disbanded the board.
I remember this.
Outright.
Yep.
I disbanded the board completely. Everybody. Just Band-Aid style.
You go into a conversation or you're in a meeting and the meeting ends and 5 minutes later you're like, man, I probably could have handled that a lot better, right? I probably could have been a lot more patient with that one person.
I wasn't seeing the trends from the customer side of things, and I wasn't positioning the team differently or making sure we had a seat at the table. I was really just hyper-focused on the people and the process, frankly.
Hopefully this is inspiring for people to do this constructively and we can start to build a culture of failure and mistakes being a little bit more normalized, a little less stigmatized. I'm Eric Ressler.
I'm Jonathan Hicken.
And this is Designing Tomorrow. Jonathan, this one should be interesting. Today we're going to talk about all the we've messed up.
Where to begin?
Exactly. Well, let's talk about why we're doing this. So a couple reasons. One, we talked about in a previous episode wanting nonprofits and social impact organizations to embrace failure, right? To be better about embracing failure and to develop a broader culture of that being more acceptable. And one of the things we talked about was we got to be willing to admit our mistakes to do that, right? And so some of this is kind of eating our own dog food. The other thing is, before we started recording season 3, we kind of put out a call to our community and our listeners and said, hey, here's some, episode topics, some of our worst episode topics that we're thinking about. Help us come up with some better ones. And this episode was one of those worst episode topics. And a number of people said, no, you should actually do that episode. So we've got 2 reasons to do it. So we're going to give it a shot. Listeners, bear with us. Hopefully it'll be at least entertaining, if nothing else. And really, we don't even have clear ideas around this, right? We've got some stuff floating around our heads. I'm hoping that the conversation will just develop naturally. But we want to talk about some of the things we've messed up and hopefully what we've learned. And even more, hopefully we can help potential listeners maybe not make some of the same mistakes that we did. So I'm going to put you on the spot and I'm going to say, Jonathan, let's talk about some things that you've messed up over the years. And let's start with maybe some leadership mistakes.
Yeah. One comes to mind immediately.
Okay.
This has to do with the board at the Seymour Center, the organization I run today.
Okay.
And keep in mind, we're actually part of the University of California, Santa Cruz. And so we kind of legally sit underneath the foundation arm of the university, meaning we don't actually legally need a board in the same way that most nonprofits do.
Yep.
Nevertheless, we had a board, and it was a very dedicated group of people who had done a ton of work, particularly coming through COVID, to kind of keep the organization going at a really tough time. And when I started, I had some ideas about what the board needed to be or the work it needed to do. Couldn't come to an agreement about what that work should look like. And so I disbanded the board.
I remember this.
Outright.
Yep.
I disbanded the board completely. Everybody. Just Band-Aid style.
Yep.
We're done.
Yep.
Looking back on that, I stand behind the decision to sort of shift the purpose and the outcomes that the board needed to be focused on. I really messed up actually how I disbanded the board.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And damaged some relationships that in 2020 hindsight that were not good relationships to damage.
I have a feeling this is going to be a theme throughout this episode, which is how you do what you do is often where the mistake really comes from, right? So even in this case, it sounds like if you had to do over, you probably still would have disbanded the board or really tried to make a big pivot. And so you wouldn't rethink that, but you've learned that maybe you would go about it a little bit differently. Are you willing to share what you might have done differently?
Yeah. And so, the way I did it was just like I said, it was kind of it was a Band-Aid. I made 12 calls back to back and it was done within an hour.
Yeah.
I think what would have done is actually involve these people more in sort of the thinking behind some of the changes and invite them to opt in or opt out on particular tasks or particular duties.
Yeah.
And basically like share the power and share agency in this, especially given the amount of work that they did and how dedicated they were.
Yeah.
It was unfair of me to come in and just kind of like rip it off and be done.
Yeah.
I think at the time, my feeling was like, I just need this done. It's not a good use of my time. I need to be focused elsewhere. But that was short-sighted because, I damaged some relationships that are really important to me.
That's a tough one because sometimes you do just need to do the Band-Aid ripoff, right? And, you could have drugged that along for months, years even, and, still ended up just kind of having to rip the Band-Aid off then, or still maybe would have ended up parting on not so good terms with some people. So I see why you did it. And yeah, at the same time, I know you well. I know your intention is never to be unfair to anyone. But sometimes, yeah, hindsight is 2020. Probably another theme that will come up a lot in this episode.
All right, your turn.
Are we talking about leadership mistakes?
Yeah, let's stick with leadership.
Oof, where to begin? Well, I mean, I should probably just share that I am an accidental entrepreneur and leader. So I have no formal leadership training other than running Cosmic for the last 15 years. And at this point, I feel like I have pretty extensive opinions and perspectives on how to do leadership. But I basically learned all of that through a series of mistakes, right? And so how do I make this not a completely long-winded story? I would say that the biggest leadership mistake that I've made over the years that has kind of formed a number of micro mistakes is not understanding that the way that my brain works is the way that most people's brain work. And so for a long time, as a leader, I would kind of just sit there and just wonder, why aren't people getting this? Why do I have to break these things down? Why do I have to explain this thing? It's just so obvious. And I'm not even trying to say this as I know everything and I'm so smart. It's more just I can see my own vision for where I want things to go, how I want things to go at Cosmic. And I had to learn the hard way in many times that you can't just assume people are going to pick that up organically by even sitting in the same room with you, right? And how do you take that vision and your approach and your leadership style and be really intentional with it and just learn that people's brains work in different ways. And so I've had to learn a lot of hard lessons because of that. That's led to, hiring and firing mistakes, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that's really the big theme for me in terms of leadership is just learning to become a leader. And I think one of the other big things I've learned as a leader is that so much of your team culture and how your team reacts and what your team thinks is good and bad and right and wrong is about how you show up every day. And, man, I've definitely not shown up at my best at times. And even in certain cases for long periods of time. And I think it's probably mostly stress, burnout, other personal things that have happened in my life that have made it so my intention was not to show up at my worst. I don't think that's ever true. But it's always that hindsight where it's you go into a conversation or you're in a meeting and the meeting ends and 5 minutes later you're like, man, I probably could have handled that a lot better, right? I probably could have said that a lot better. I probably could have been a lot more patient with that one person. And so that's something that, frankly, is still something I struggle with to this day. Now, what I've learned is that for me, a lot of that is just my baseline psychology. Am I getting enough sleep? Which for a long time with young kids, I've not been. Am I keeping my exercise routine up? Am I spending time connected with my community? Am I getting out in nature? Am I being creative outside of work? Am I getting my music time in? Those are the things that sets me up to be the best version of myself. And when I'm not doing enough of those things consistently enough, which sometimes happens because life is messy, then I'm not set up to be the best version of myself. And then I can start to set a bad example for the rest of the team about how to show up and how to handle things not going well.
So it sounds to me like there's actually two things going on in there, right? There's the one, hey, how do I communicate vision or priorities or outcomes here more clearly to the team? But also, how do I manage myself and my own time to show up healthy? I'm curious. You've outlined, your dedication to exercise and
Sure.
Creativity outside. What have you done on the communication side to help, bridge that gap between, as you described, where your head's at and where everybody else is at?
So many things over the years, lots of experiments. So for a long time, we had no formal, internal communication plan other than, we had a lot of internal stand-ups. We all worked in the same room. So a lot of it just kind of happened organically, right? And in the early days, the focus was just so clearly on the work. It was just the work. We want to do the work. We want to do the work well. which I think is right. Like in those early days when you're really just like cutting your teeth, it's almost just like boot camp. And it's just like, we're going to do the work. We're going to focus on doing the best creative work we possibly can. This is actually another mistake, in my opinion, in that if as a creative professional and in the work that we do, and my background is as a designer, right? And as a creative person. And I think I had to learn the hard lesson that creativity in and of itself is not necessarily going to create business outcomes that our clients are looking for. And if you get stuck in that mode of like, well, we're going to just compete on the best creative output possible. First of all, there is a high bar there, right? There are some incredible creative people in the world and incredible agencies doing amazing work with massive resources and usually massive budgets to back up that work and big teams and long time frames and usually working on bigger brands. And, that's not who we serve. We tend to serve small to mid-sized nonprofits between 2 to 50 million a year usually. And, they don't have the same budget as like Coca-Cola, obviously. With all that to say, like I've had to learn, and especially a lesson I've learned in the last 5 years or so, and even like really, really strongly dedicated to this right now. It's like, how can we connect and explore how design and creativity and communications have a place and a seat at the table, a proper seat at the table when it comes to moving social impact missions forward. And it is kind of a design problem, right? So it's not out of bounds for me, like in terms of even the way that I solve problems. But for a long time, I was just so focused on the creative side and not how to tie that into the strategic side. So that's like a meta answer to that. And then like the communication internally to the team. I mean, I don't even know where to begin there on mistakes that I've made, from over communicating to under communicating to being too rigid to not being rigid enough. There's something that kind of happens if you hang on to the same team long enough, which has really been my focus. And my focus has really been on like that showing up and being my best self, where there is some amount of that just kind of starts to gel organically, in my opinion. Now, I think that's one leadership style. I don't think it's the only one. I think it's the one that tends to work best for me. We do some light strategic planning every year, I would say. So we usually open the year up with a vision and some clear kind of KPIs, and we try to break it down to like 3 main objectives for the year, because I've just found that anything more than that, and it just doesn't get done, starts to get overwhelming. And then, we do use the MVS framework that I outlined in episode 1 of this season to test these new ideas. We do have objectives. We have problems we're trying to solve all the time. And so it's kind of a combination of those two things of like having a big, clear, simple, distilled vision, and then testing against that vision and assessing what's working and what's not working.
Can we move on to like business strategy? Because everything that you just described to me is like you're talking about business strategy as much as like the idea of design, having a seat at the executive table, right? Like to me, that is a strategic positioning move for you and Cosmic. So I wonder, like in that realm, like what's a mistake in that area that you've made?
Well, I think the biggest mistake, and I kind of hinted at this, is that not realizing that early enough and not doing a good enough job knowing what the answer to that question is and making a case for it and approaching our projects from that vantage point. This is something we're good at now, and I think there's still room to improve here. I think part of that is because there is some level of subjectivity with branding and messaging, and it isn't necessarily only a science, right? And I think if you get too scientific with it, in my opinion, that's the wrong way to look at it. So the mistake I would say is like not getting into that soon enough and really not thinking deeply about any kind of coherent business strategy. Like, and this kind of leads into maybe a little bit more on the marketing side, but for the longest time in the early days, we did the work. We were born out of a co-working space, so like opportunities were coming to us naturally. Everything was referral. It was 100% referral based. And this is pretty common for creative agencies, is that it's often largely driven by referral. But I learned pretty quickly that was a pretty shaky business strategy, because referrals are not consistent. They're not guaranteed. You can't predict how they're going to happen. And so you're really operating on a lot of risk and trust, and that can work out, and that actually sustained us for quite a while. But we did find that it had a limit for us. And maybe that's because my network wasn't as strong as it could have been. If I had a stronger, more connected network, maybe we would be great with just that strategy. But this is actually, frankly, what led us to focusing on social impact. Is one of the things we realized is like we've got to own a niche. We've got to have a clear way to differentiate our agency against the 40,000 plus other agencies in America, and then not to mention the world. And we need to build some deeper expertise and some repeatability in our work, because we were just doing all kinds of projects early in the days, from video production work to branding work to web design work for all kinds of different organizations. And so we were building some foundational skills, but not enough repeatability to like really get super good at any of it. And so the niching in helped us understand what are the things that this niche needs the most help with. And even within that, there's still only certain things that we help our clients with, and we have boundaries around that too.
A mistake I made actually sounds a little similar. This is actually before my time in the social impact space. It was when I was in tech, but similarly, like I wasn't putting enough thought into strategy and niche, and like I was running a customer success team. It was like 50 people, $25 million quota. Like it was a big team with some big goals. And I remember at the end of my time there, I got replaced. So I was part of this company from when there were less than 10 people, and by the time I left, there were 400. So I was there during this like early rapid growth phase, but I got replaced by someone who was more seasoned in sort of that next stage of growth.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, I totally get it. Like that person was more suited for the job that as it existed at that time. But I remember my exit interview with the CEO. And he said something like, "Jonathan, you are an A+ team leader. You are an A+ culture guy. You are an A+ like sales guy, but you're a B- strategic thinker."
Oof.
And that like it stung, but I heard it.
Yeah.
And looking back on that, right? Like I was really focused on my team, right? And because I knew that was my strong suit. It was a big team. I really cared about the people. And I spent a lot of time with them trying to set them up for success.
Yeah.
But all the while, I wasn't seeing the trends from the customer side of things, and I wasn't positioning the team differently or making sure we had a seat at the table. I was really just hyper-focused on the people and the process, frankly, rather than the strategy or the results. And looking back, like that was a mistake.
Yeah. I think that's natural though. And I hear some reflection and some like congruency between our experiences. And I do think you can have the opposite problem, right? Where if you're only focused on theoretical strategy, but you don't understand the customers, you don't understand the people, you don't understand the processes. Like, I mean, we need all of these things to be kind of humming, right? Should we get into kind of team and hiring?
Yeah,
mistakes?
sure. So we're talking about team. Yeah.
Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Yeah. I mean, I got to share one particular story. I'm not going to use any names or any identifying information. I, at some point in my career, let somebody go and accidentally blind copied them on the email to HR about the decision and saw them open the email.
Like in real life?
In real life. Like, watched them open this email. So, I mean, like literally that one moment was absolutely crushing. I made the worst mistake that any manager can make when they're having to make an already difficult decision to let somebody go.
Yeah.
But needless to say, I have learned to be extremely careful about the address line in emails, particularly with sensitive information.
Yeah, probably just good in general advice.
Yeah, but that's actually, that was just a sort of a silly mistake. I would say another mistake was letting somebody go in a way that that wasn't dignified.
Yeah.
And didn't leave them with the feeling of the dignity and respect and mutual admiration. I let somebody go in a way that really hurt them.
Yeah.
And I actually think about that a lot to this day. And this happened a long time ago. And that was a big mistake. And I don't want to be that kind of leader, right? Like I want to build teams where even when those difficult decisions happen, baseline level of human respect and partnership still exists, even if we need to part ways. That's what I aspire to. And I made a mistake, and I hurt somebody, and I look back on that and I feel really bad about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely resonate with that, and I've been lucky that I've only had to let a few people go over the years, more than I would like to, but less than I think is usual for a company of our size and length of operations. And it's just I know this may come off as like, oh, like the poor founder story, but like if you've never had to fire someone, it is awful. It is awful. And if you've never been fired, of course, like being fired is awful too. Like, let's be real. And probably if you had to choose one or the other, firing someone is probably the better. I mean, you've been fired and fired people. What do you think?
Oh, very difficult I have been fired. I've been fired multiple times. Let's be clear about that. I've also had to fire people.
Yeah.
They're both extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I think the ramifications of being fired are deeper and broader in terms of life impact than like the intense emotional sort of difficulty of letting somebody go. Nevertheless, they're both challenging in their own way.
So let's talk a little bit about that process, because this is something that I've gone all over the place on. So I'll share just a brief story. The very first person I ever had to fire was one of our like very early employees, and he was an awesome guy. He was one of our developers, and he was the most kind-hearted, generous, amazing person. Loved him, still love him to this day. But there came a point where he just was not getting his work done, like at all, and it just like wasn't working. I'm not really sure exactly what was happening. I think there were some challenges with distraction and procrastination, which I struggle with personally, so I completely get that. But at the end of the day, like we got to ship product, we got to ship solutions for our clients, and if that's not happening and we're relying on a team member, that's not a sustainable situation. And because this was early in the day for Cosmic, and I'd never fired anyone before, I got like really deep into, okay, let's work on this together. Like, let's put a performance improvement plan together. Let's set some, really clear guidelines for what that looks like and what we're expecting of you, and make sure like, hey, are we not doing a good enough job communicating expectations? Is that maybe the problem? And went kind of deep on that. That wasn't working. Then started to go even deeper and like, okay, it seems like you've got some issues with, procrastination and potentially attention. Let's fund some therapy for you to like get through that. Which, at the time, like looking back, I think that's a pretty intense like performance improvement plan. That's a little bit above and beyond what a typical employer will do. And to be clear, we've never done that since. But we were really committed to like, we love this person. They're a value member of our team, and we want to help them improve. And we did that for a while, and there was still not improvement after that point. And then we gave them an even longer runway to continue to try. And at the end of this, it had probably been like 6 months of like really concerted effort. It was taking a lot of my personal time. It was like really bringing the team down. We were missing deadlines for clients. Like, it was a bad situation. We were pretty small, so any one person not performing has a huge impact on a company that's really small. And finally, we had to actually fire this person. And even though we did all of that, I distinctly remember when we had to fire this person, it was raining, and I was like carrying computers and gear out, and I felt just like so horrible about all of this. And, looking back, like, did I make a mistake there? I think I did. But I think the mistake I made is I didn't fire this person quickly enough, which sounds really brutal. And I feel bad about that perspective, but it is actually the one that I've landed on. And maybe the way to frame this is, I know we've talked about this before, but a lot of times people use this kind of metaphor of running a team as like, it's like your family. Like, we're a family here. And I just think that is a really toxic way to think about running a team, even if it's grounded in good intention. And when I think about running Cosmic and the teams that I see that are the most effective, they really think about their team like a high performance sports team, right? Where there's a group of people coming together for a shared mission. In the case of sports, to win the game, right? But in the case of business or social impact, is to create an impact or to have outcomes that are based on your business. And you're trying to find the very best people in the world to do that together. And everyone needs to pull their weight, right? You want to see everyone within reason, dedicating time, energy, effort, learning, respect for everyone else on the team, And, no one's going to show up at their best every day, as we've talked about earlier in this episode, but the overall trend should be as equal as possible. And if any one person on the team is not performing to the needs of the job or in a way that the rest of the team really can see, that is just so bad for culture. So inspired by some, different philosophies on this from various sources, I've really kind of come around to, especially with a new employee, if there's a not a meaningful fit kind of starting to gel pretty quickly and we have good onboarding to support this, we part ways fast. And we're very generous in how we do that. We're clear about that up front, and we have generous severance packages so that it's not as disruptive. And really it's kind of in lieu of a performance improvement plan. We're not militant on this. We're human, right? We understand people will make mistakes and we give people the benefit of the doubt. But I've learned over the years that that's actually better for everyone, even the people who end up not being a good fit, because it's coming anyway, right? And no one likes being part of this kind of awkward place where everyone knows it's not quite working, but you're trying to work through it. So obviously there's a balance there, but I mean, how do you think about that?
I think I agree with that. I've also learned the hard way in that regard. It's one thing for an executive director and an agency founder and director to talk about this, but it really is true that I have found that the terminations that ended with the most dignity and respect were the ones that happened quickly and swiftly and clearly.
Yeah.
Not the ones that were drug along. It's almost like a relationship, right? Like it's if you're dating someone and you're like, this is not working, and you keep it going, like that can be a really painful period. And I think this is not too dissimilar. And so again, going back to that like theme of dignity and respect, like that's what I strive for when I have to make a termination. And more often than not, that outcome of dignity and respect can be achieved if it happens quickly and clearly and kindly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Let's talk about marketing mistakes.
Oof.
I'm going to make you go first on this one, and then you can start to prod me.
Yeah, I've made so many marketing mistakes because I'm learning, every day, and the landscape is changing every day, and I think many of us are learning on the fly because our jobs mean we can't put all of our time into thinking about marketing strategy. But I think the single biggest mistake, and I've made this mistake multiple times, is like not going all in on a channel that I know is working, right? And looking back and being like, that was the way to go, and I spread out the resources too thin.
Yep.
I tried to do too many things when really the best solution was right there, and we could have like gone 5x on that particular channel and seen better results than we got by spreading, kind of going this like wide blast method.
I would say this is probably one of the most common marketing mistakes.
Yeah.
I might even say that I think we might be making this mistake right now for our own marketing at Cosmic a little bit. We're looking at what to do. Don't worry, listeners, the podcast is not on the chopping block. But yeah, it is hard to know, right? Because marketing, in certain ways, doing marketing well is just making a bunch of mistakes and learning from them. And I think that you do have to, and it is always changing, right? And another big marketing mistake is just like finding something that works and just kind of like putting it on autopilot, and then eventually it stops working usually. So yeah, that's a common one for sure. So I wouldn't feel too bad. I would say, honestly, ironically, the biggest marketing mistake that we've made is not marketing.
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean,
like we didn't market Cosmic for really at least 6, if not 7 years. The first 6 or 7 years, we were really focused on client relationships, client work, and referrals. And that got us to a certain point. We talked about this already a little bit. But then we realized, of course, that marketing is important. And more than marketing, like really building a brand and like getting brand awareness and having clarity around our niche and all of that. And the thing is, though, that until you're forced to market, you might think you have those answers, and then you actually don't. Until you have to answer questions like, well, who is your actual audience and what channels are they on and how do you define them from a demographical standpoint or whatever. And okay, what's the ad going to be? And what's the message that's going to work better because you know this audience so well? Like marketing is such a forcing function for business strategy. And so even if you don't think you need to do marketing for some reason, I would challenge that, not just because I believe so fully in marketing, but because it is a forcing function for having to make all these really tough business decisions that have so many other benefits outside of being able to do marketing well.
I'm like sitting here beating myself up over these decisions that I've made, like on jobs that I had years ago, that I've moved on from. But, one example that really comes to mind is I was we worked together on this, the Museum of Art and History at Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. And we were getting to launch this new public plaza called Abbott Square. And I was in charge of marketing it. And actually looking back, we did a good job overall, but I realized that we could have done even better. What we realized in hindsight was like the person to person word of mouth was really the most powerful way of getting people down.
Yeah.
And so we did something. We had T-shirts, we had hats, like we were giving out freebies that sparked conversation between friends and family. I would have actually gone heavier on that hyper centralized marketing in the downtown Santa Cruz area, physical, whether it's billboards or signpost flags or more swag, but really things that got people who are already close to the plaza, wanting to take, the block detour to check it out. Or next time they were thinking of going downtown, they're like, hey, we should check out Abbott Square. That really worked for us. And in hindsight, I would have done more of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, again, 2020, right? Hindsight is always 2020. I want to share another mistake that I've made that I still feel like I make from time to time. And this is it's like an ebb and flow mistake for me. What tends to happen is we have like a big challenge at Cosmic, a big growth point, like we're changing our services or our niche or whatever, right? Over the years, we've made these big moves. And in those moments of inventing something new, I'm really like energized and activated and engaged because that's tantalizing for me. That's where I think, get the most energized doing this work. And then we roll these things out and they start to work and they start to get into the kind of operational end of it, right? Taking an idea from the exciting, messy, creative idea space into the operational space. Luckily, I have really solid members on my team who can do operations, that I trust to do operations, that can help take these crazy ideas and break them down into the necessary logical components. But what I've found over the years is that I've kind of let things coast at times, where like that exciting, messy work is done. And then it's we get to the point of like solving some of the early problems and then it's kind of working. And then I just kind of sit back. I'm like, it's working. Cool. And I'm in that mode. And I think I don't even realize I'm in that mode until a new problem arises and we have to get back in that problem solving mode. And then in reflection, I'm like, oh, I was coasting. Like I needed to be like laying the path for the next stage of the organization. And like the longer I've been running Cosmic, the more I've realized that amongst all the jobs that I have to do, because we're a small team and we all do multiple jobs, the single most important job for me is to just be crystal clear on vision and always be thinking about that and always be curious about whether or not are we meeting our vision? Is it the right vision? Do we have the right steps in motion to meet that next kind of like block that we need to be building to meet that vision? And basically, as soon as I get out of that mindset, I'm creating a future problem for Cosmic.
Look, I'm like getting excited imagining being a team member, right? Like that's exactly what I would want my boss, the owner of the company, to be thinking about. It's hard. It's like easier said than done. Right?
It is. Yeah.
Like, we bringing it back to something you said earlier, right? Is like, you got to take care of yourself and you got to pace yourself, right? And so there are these times, right, where you're like, okay, there was an accomplishment. I can take a deep breath.
Sure.
Like, woof, we did it.
Yeah.
But then that can sometimes stretch out too long. So
it can stretch too long.
Yeah. So,
and I mean, it's like, it's not always easy to have vision, right? Like sometimes things are murky, right? The world is changing, or, you get pulled into another really important part of the business, especially if you're a smaller organization where, it'd be nice if all I had to do all day is like sit around reading business books and thinking about vision for Cosmic. That would be an awesome job. But I don't have that luxury. I need to also be our creative director and work through internal problems that we're having and, having meetings with new potential clients. I have a lot of things that I'm doing. And so, and actually all of that is helpful for building vision, right? If you're just completely detached, like, can you even really be strategic if you're not closely tied to the work that's being done. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, I mean, it's a requisite part of the job.
So it is hard though, because you can't just sit down every day and say, be visionary, right? Like that's like no one can do that. I don't care. And I think a lot of times, like my biggest strategic achievements and epiphanies have happened when I'm not working, when I'm not like, it's like kind of in the background, or I watch a film and that like sparks some idea that has some kind of association, right? Like this isn't linear work. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do know that I've made that mistake of coasting for too long and just kind of losing sight of that important part of what I should be doing every day.
I'm sitting here smiling, but also dreading talking about the other hundreds of mistakes I've made. I mean, honestly, we could have a 3-hour episode on mistakes, and it would be really interesting. But it's been fun to open up about some of these things with you.
Yeah, totally. This has been fun. Hopefully, it's fun for listeners. To bring it back to the early kind of framing of this episode, I do think being more open about mistakes and doing that respectfully and with good intention, I think is a good thing to do. It's a good exercise. I feel kind of like a little bit of weight off my shoulders actually just doing this episode. So hopefully this is inspiring for people to do this constructively, and we can start to build a culture of failure and mistakes being a little bit more normalized, a little less stigmatized, and maybe we'll learn some stuff from each other, and that'll help move the entire sector forward. So thank you, Jonathan. This has been fun. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. It really helps. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do for your cause and for being part of the movement to move humanity and the planet forward.